In 1963, you could walk into a Dodge or Plymouth showroom, point at a plain four-door sedan, and order an engine that was never built for the street. 425 horsepower, a wedge head big block, breathing through two four-barrel carburetors bolted to a manifold that looked more like plumbing than an intake. And here is the strange part. The same company that had just staked its whole comeback on the best warranty in America would not put that warranty behind this engine. So why would Chrysler build something it refused to stand behind? This is the 426 Max Wedge. One thing has to be clear first because people get it wrong constantly. This is not the Hemi. Same displacement, 426 cubic inches, completely different engine. The Hemi came later. This one used wedge-shaped combustion chambers, and in 1963, it was the most ferocious thing Chrysler had ever sold with a license plate. The factory rated it at 415 horsepower with the milder compression and 425 with the high compression version. Torque was somewhere near 480 pound-feet. Numbers a lot of people who drove these cars still believe were underrated, and the owner's manual did not exactly oversell the experience. It warned that the long camshaft would make the engine idle rough and feel lazy at low speed, and it told you, in writing, not to expect the gas mileage of a normal car. There was even a service note telling drivers to keep wide-open throttle bursts under 15 seconds, or risk hurting the engine. So, yeah, not exactly a grocery getter. And it behaved like it. On a cold morning, it could be stubborn to start and unhappy to idle, the compression and that long camshaft fighting you the whole way. This was an engine that wanted full throttle on a drag strip and merely tolerated everything else. But to understand how something this hostile ended up in a Chrysler showroom, you have to go back to a company that was the opposite of fast. Because in the late 1950s, Chrysler was not who you went to for speed. It was the brand your accountant respected. Sensible engineering, careful styling, and under a new president named Lynn Townsend, the boldest warranty in the business. A 5-year, 50,000-mile powertrain guarantee at a time when most of the industry promised you 12 months and not much else. But he understood something every car company eventually learns. Nothing makes young buyers take you seriously faster than winning on a Sunday. So in October of 1961, a quiet program started up inside Chrysler, run by an engineer named Tom Hoover. Hoover had a physics degree and a habit of treating the drag strip like a laboratory. He was also part of an unofficial club of Chrysler engineers who built and raced cars on their own time, calling themselves the Ramchargers. These were not marketing men. They were the engineers who designed Chrysler's engines, sneaking off to the strip on weekends. And these were the people Townsend turned loose. Their first real factory weapon arrived for 1962, the 413 Max Wedge. That engine made a statement almost immediately. A Plymouth running the 413, nicknamed the Melrose Missile, went to the strip in the summer of 1962 and ran the quarter mile in 11.93 seconds at just under 119 miles an hour. It was the first official pass under 12 seconds by a full-size car with a factory engine option. A four-door sedan, the kind of thing a dad would drive to church, doing something race cars struggled to do. But the 413 was only the warm-up. For 1963, Chrysler boarded out to 426 cubic inches, and the Max Wedge became the engine people still talk about. Now, here is where it earns the word brutal, and it starts with the people who built it rather than the parts. Hoover and his engineers were not trying to make a smooth engine. They were trying to win, and every decision in the 426 bent toward that one goal. Look at the cylinder heads first. The intake ports were opened up by roughly 25% over a standard production head, with oversized intake valves just over 2 inches across. The exhaust valves were so large that the cylinder bores actually had to be notched to give them room to open. That is not a tuning trick. That is a factory cutting metal out of the engine block so the valves would have room to breathe. Underneath the heads, the block itself was a heavier-duty casting, with bigger oil passages, and Chrysler stress-relieved and sonic-tested the good ones to make sure the cylinder walls could survive what was coming. Inside went forged pistons, forged connecting rods, double valve springs, and solid lifters, which meant an owner had to set the valve clearances by hand, the way a race team does. And turning all of it was a long, high-lift camshaft that gave the engine all of its top-end power and almost none of its manners. And the compression was the final clue to what this engine really was. You could order it 2 ways. The milder version squeezed the fuel at 11:1, which was already aggressive for the street. The wild version went all the way to 13.5 to 1, demanding high-octane fuel you could not pump at a corner gas station. A road car does not run 13.5 to 1, a race car does. And then there was the part everyone remembers, the intake. The Max Wedge wore a cross-ram, a wild aluminum manifold with runners about 15 inches long that crossed over the top of the engine, feeding the left bank from a carburetor sitting on the right side, and the right bank from a carburetor on the left. Two big Carter 4 barrels sat staggered up top, the hottest versions flowing closer to 750 cubic feet of air a minute each. The whole assembly looked less like a car part and more like something off a small aircraft. Those long runners tuned the intake to make power high in the rev range, exactly where a drag engine lives. Even the exhaust got special treatment. Chrysler designed cast iron manifolds with big outlets, shaped to flow almost like tubular headers, because the racing rules of the day did not allow bolt-on headers. So they cast the headers right into the engine. But brutal on paper means nothing if you cannot actually buy it and live with it. And this is where the warranty story comes back. These engines were never sold like a normal option. They were not in the glossy brochure. Most salesmen did not know how to order one. You had to know the right code. And dealers tended to quietly steer known racers toward it rather than families. The cars that came with it were stripped inside, rubber floor mats, none of the usual comfort. The 1962 version even came with its own separate owner's manual supplement, because the standard manual did not cover an engine like this. And then the warranty. By the middle of the decade, Chrysler stopped being subtle about it. Cars built around the 426 competition engine left the factory with a notice that spelled it out in plain language. This car, it said, was intended for supervised acceleration trials, not for highway or passenger use, and it was sold in capital letters as is. That famous 5-year, 50,000-mile coverage, the very thing Chrysler was advertising on every other showroom floor, did not apply here. A company that had built its entire comeback on standing behind its cars had deliberately built one engine it would not stand behind, at the exact moment it was bragging about the longest warranty in the country. If you are getting something out of this one, take a second to subscribe. The channel runs on it, and there is a lot more of this kind of story coming. Now, back to the strip, because this is where the Max Wedge stopped being a curiosity and started being a real problem for everyone else. By 1963, the Max Wedge was running the show in superstock drag racing. The Ramchargers, those same moonlighting Chrysler engineers, took their Max Wedge Dodge to the NHRA Nationals and won, with Jim Thornton turning a 12.23 in the final to take the team its first National Superstock Championship. And here is the detail most people never hear. The car was so dominant that the NHRA did not entirely trust it. Officials sealed the engine each night and re-inspected it the next day, because a 4-door Dodge was not supposed to be that fast. It was. Earlier that same year, another Ramchargers car driven by Al Ekstrand had already taken the Winter Nationals. Plymouth had its own factory-backed team, the Golden Commandos, built from engineers on the other side of the same building, and they were right there in the mix too, finishing runner-up at those same Winter Nationals. So you had two teams of Chrysler engineers drawing the same paychecks, designing the same engines by day, and trying to beat each other senseless at the strip on the weekend. It was an internal rivalry that pushed both teams harder than any outside competitor could have. Chrysler did not have a strong 4-speed manual ready for this kind of power yet, so the engineers leaned on something nobody expected to see at a drag race: the TorqueFlite automatic. They taught an automatic to launch hard and shift consistently under full load, and it worked so well it became a Mopar trademark at the strip for years. Then they went after weight. The lightweight cars stripped out the sound insulation, swapped in aluminum front fenders, hoods, and bumpers, and on some cars even moved the battery back to the trunk for better traction off the line. The result was a plain-looking sedan that could embarrass nearly anything sitting next to it. Every one of those wins did exactly what Townsend had hoped. It put Chrysler in front of young buyers who, a few years earlier, would not have looked twice at the brand. Win on Sunday, sell on Monday was not just a saying here. It was the entire strategy. A lot of historians point straight back at engines like this one as the spark for the whole muscle car craze that followed. Before there was a Charger or a Roadrunner on every suburban street, there was a plain Savoy with a cross-ram, quietly rewriting what an American family car was allowed to be. But the dominance had a side effect nobody at Chrysler had planned for. The Max Wedge was so good that the company's own ambitions outgrew it. That ambition came straight from the top. Lynn Townsend did not just want to win drag races on the weekend. He wanted to win the 1964 Daytona 500, the biggest stage in American racing. And the Max Wedge, for all its ferocity off the line, was not built to dominate at over 150 miles an hour on a high-banked oval, lap after lap. So Tom Hoover and another engineer, Don Moore, went back to that same big block bottom end and did something that changed everything. They bolted on hemispherical cylinder heads. That is the engine that would become the legendary 426 Hemi. And it arrived in 1964 like a hammer. Richard Petty took a Hemi Plymouth to Daytona and led 184 of the 200 laps, winning at a record average of over 154 miles an hour, with Chrysler cars sweeping the top 3 positions. Which means the Max Wedge had quietly engineered its own replacement. The same heavy-duty block that made the Wedge possible was exactly what the Hemi needed underneath it. The Wedge had done the hard work, then handed the stage to the engine built on its bones. By the end of 1964, the Max Wedge was finished. And that short, intense life is exactly why the survivors are worth what they are today. These were never mass-produced. For all of 1962, only about 512 Max Wedge cars were built across Dodge and Plymouth combined. 1963 was even thinner, with word among historians that Plymouth built fewer than 200. Some specific versions are almost impossible to find. There were only 18 of one particular Superstock Savoy and only around 48 of the aluminum front lightweights, with just a handful of those known to still exist. Even in 1964, when a proper 4-speed finally arrived, only a few dozen cars from each brand got it. So, when one of these plain sedans comes up for sale now, it does not sell like an old 4-door. The good ones run well into 6 figures, and the best documented cars have crossed $250,000 at auction. A stripped-down Plymouth that a salesman in 1963 was almost reluctant to order, now worth more than the house it might have been parked in front of. There is something fitting about how it ended up. Chrysler built an engine so far over the line that it would not attach its own famous warranty to it. An engine that idled badly, fouled its plugs, drank premium fuel, and warned you in writing not to lean on it too long. The factory all but told buyers this thing was too much for the street, and the right buyers heard that as a promise rather than a warning. Tom Hoover, the man who treated the drag strip like a physics problem, passed away in 2015 at 85. Long after the engine he helped build had gone from an awkward special order to one of the most sought-after pieces of Mopar history there is. The engine Chrysler would not guarantee turned out to be the one collectors now guarantee they will chase forever. If you want to see how Chrysler's wild streak only got bigger from here, the video on screen breaks down the engine that replaced it, the 426 Hemi, and the war it started on the racetrack. I will see you in that one.